Hello, ladies, gentlemen, all of our non-binary folks tuning in to the program today. This is a weekly show where we dig underneath the headlines. We talk about what the mainstream media isn't talking about. We focus on activism abroad and right here locally in Kalamazoo, Michigan. It is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, weekly show where we call out the establishment on its BS. Now, as always, the following thoughts, views, and opinions are not necessarily those of 89.1 FM WIDR Kalamazoo or Western Michigan University. So, beautiful day outside, all you listeners out there. Try to enjoy some of this nice 70-some degree weather. It's going to start getting cold pretty soon, which I guess a lot of us enjoy. We get a chance to get our pumpkin spice coffees out and whip out our hoodies and our blankets. But let's also keep in mind there are those out there who don't necessarily have ready access to those sorts of facilities, maybe perhaps not even a home. And we'll be talking later on, giving a little bit of an update about the homeless protest encampment downtown, the Bronson Park Freedom Camp, as it is called. But first, why don't we start by diving in to some international observations, particularly this being the day after the anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. So, as happens every year, is the 17th anniversary yesterday. A lot of attention, of course, paid, reasonably so, to the people who lost their lives that day in New York City and in Pennsylvania and at the Pentagon. But it's also a very good opportunity and a very necessary opportunity to discuss where we have come in those intervening 17 years. What has happened? What mistakes America has made in that intervening time that either has exacerbated the problems that caused the 9/11 attacks or have really gone back and really done some actions that more or less spit in the face of a lot of the people that died that day. And not only the actual 9/11 victims, but the victims of our foreign policy in the intervening years. Over 1 million dead in Iraq and thousands dead across the Middle Eastern region in the intervening war on terror that ostensibly started in response to the attacks of September 11th, 2001. And I wanted to start with this article. This is from Mint Press News, and it lies out in some kind of very concrete terms some of the hypocrisy that happens at the highest levels of American foreign policy that is not only working to keep us less safe, but it's also creating some very strange bedfellows. And, I think it would be remiss of me to not mention, some historical context behind what I'm about to read. And just to know, the headline of this article is 17 years after 9/11, U.S. counts Al-Qaeda among allies in Syria and Yemen. Now, America has a long and storied history of making peculiar bedfellows with authoritarian groups, radical jihadist groups, particularly going back to the Cold War in the 1980s, when the Soviets were fighting the Afghans in Afghanistan. A lot of the groups that we funded and supplied were those that would grow up and evolve into not only Al-Qaeda, but also a lot of the strength of the Taliban can be traced back to the aid and abetting we gave them during the 1980s. Now, one would think after the events of 9/11, America would be a lot more careful about who it funds and supplies in that region of the world. At least putting what was the war on terror? The war on an adjective, as it were, was to target terrorist groups, and certainly in no way strengthen them, or in any other way use them for the military-industrial complex's own particular geopolitical interests. Unfortunately, Washington, D.C., and America more broadly, is a place of very short memories and cyclical blunders. As they said in Battlestar Galactica, all this has happened before, and all this will happen again. So I'll go ahead and just dive into the text of this article. This was published yesterday on Mint Press News, written by Whitney Webb. Less than 2 decades after the attacks of September 11th, the U.S. government has now effectively allied with the Al-Qaeda terrorist group it has long blamed for planning and executing those attacks, which still remain the worst terror attack to ever taken place on U.S. soil. Despite the U.S. having launched the war in Afghanistan, the invasion and occupation of Iraq, and the years-long war on terror as a means of allegedly countering Al-Qaeda and its affiliates, the past year has revealed several instances in which Washington has been making deals with, protecting, and even indirectly but knowingly arming Al-Qaeda operatives in countries like Yemen and Syria. The about-face has come as the U.S. interest in counterterrorism throughout the Middle East has been superseded by regime change policies targeting countries like Yemen, Syria, and Iran. And I'm going to take a quick aside here real quick. One of the big tragedies of the war on terror is it was sold in a very different way to the American public, when really, at best, it's been used as a cover for the United States government to participate in a lot of the very same regime change style politics that it has for decades. And while in the Cold War, it was ostensibly to, quote unquote, stop the spread of communism, and particularly in areas of the world like Latin America, where we would facilitate coups. Actually, it goes without saying, September 11th is also a very peculiar anniversary. That was also the day in 1973 that America helped stage a coup in Chile, overthrowing leftist President Salvador Allende and replacing him with a vicious dictator named Pinochet, who had a horrendous human rights record. If you dig into the history of it, this was a man whose crimes were ghastly and I would say comparable to some of the Middle Eastern dictators that we have overthrown, such as Saddam Hussein. It's also where that famous trope of throwing communists or socialists out of helicopters comes from, because the Pinochet regime was noted for throwing political opponents literally out of helicopters, among many other acts of torture and abuse. And some estimate as many as 60,000 people were killed short term from the fallout of the Chilean coup. Well, it seems that history doesn't miss a beat. And when given the choice between doing smart and savvy foreign policy that would actually shrink and limit the influence of terrorist groups, Washington would rather engage in a twofold foreign policy. That one engages in drone warfare and various other types of war that do nothing if not provide perfect recruiting material for groups like Al-Qaeda, or in this instance that we're talking about, this article, outright give them material support because it fits our geopolitical agenda. Let's go back to our article. Currently, the Syrian government and its allies have been preparing to begin a military offensive against the last rebel-held province in the country, a province that is openly dominated by Al-Qaeda-linked groups, namely al-Nusra, now known as Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Despite the fact that Al-Qaeda's presence in the area is well known, top U.S. government officials and even U.S. President Donald Trump have urged Syria to refrain from recklessly attacking the Idlib province, claiming that militants in the province are not terrorists but people fighting a civil war against a brutal dictator. Not only that, but the U.S. government has now openly made plans to attack the Syrian government if Al-Qaeda affiliates in Idlib fail. Recent statements from U.S. officials show that the Trump administration is set to take Al-Qaeda affiliates at their word and lay blame for any use of chemical weapons on the Syrian government, despite the fact that the U.S. government has admitted in the past that these very same rebel groups possess chemical weapons themselves. And there's actually been a lot, this is me kind of commenting on the article, there has actually been a lot of reported instances of Al-Qaeda and other terrorist jihadist cells basically staging false flags that would give, the American government rationale to initiate airstrikes. There's even the last, big news story that came out about, when Peter Jennings talked wistfully about the beauty of our missiles, that it really made no sense on the part of the Assad regime, take out of the equation how one might feel about Assad and his own human rights record, but it would make no sense when Syrian war was winding down for him to stage a chemical attack on civilians. There were just a lot of red flags that this particular attack might have been in some way astroturfed or false flagged. So let's go in, let's talk a little bit about more of the history of how this kind of change around happened that we're now supporting Al-Qaeda. U.S. cooperation with Al-Qaeda in Syria is hardly new. Back in 2016, al-Nusra front commander told German newspaper Kolnerstag Anzeiger that when the Al-Qaeda-linked group was besieged by Syrian and Russian military forces, we had officers from Turkey, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and America here, experts in the use of satellites, rockets, reconnaissance, and thermal security cameras that helped prevent the group's defeat. When asked specifically whether U.S. officers were present, the al-Nusra front commander stated that the Americans are on our side. The assertion has been bolstered by evidence that airstrikes conducted by U.S.-led coalition in Syria have focused only on ISIS and intentionally avoided al-Nusra positions. A year later, the U.S. again aided al-Nusra by essentially removing the group from Washington's terror watch list, despite the fact that it is al-Qaeda's Syrian branch. The removal took place after al-Nusra changed its name to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, following which the U.S. declined to add the group's updated name to the terror watch list. The U.S.'s reluctance in adding the group to the watch list was likely related to the fact that some of the smaller rebel groups that joined al-Nusra Front under the HTS banner had previously been armed and funded by the U.S. government. Even the U.S. State Department admitted at the time that the name change was likely an al-Qaeda play to bring as much of the Syrian opposition under its operational control as possible, which is exactly what took place as al-Qaeda consolidated control over the vast majority of the last stronghold in Syria. However, this rather candid admission from the State Department was not enough to see them added to the terror watch list. Unfortunately, the U.S.'s willingness to treat al-Nusra as an ally in Syria seems to continue, given the Trump administration's ultimate goal of targeting Iran's influence in Syria, as well as its newly redefined goal of regime change in Damascus. It is now plain that the U.S.'s stance toward al-Qaeda can shift from enemy to ally depending on its political expediency and Washington's geopolitical goals. And again, as I noted earlier, really isn't anything new as far as American foreign policy goes. Keep in mind, Osama bin Laden was one of our key allies in the 1980s when we were giving material support to his brand of jihadists when they were fighting the Soviets. What is kind of startling now, though, is that we get to see Washington transfer these alliances essentially in real time. And when there is such a short and painful cultural memory of what this particular group did to Americans in during the 9/11 attacks. So, as troubling as it was back then, and there were people, adults in the room at the time in the 80s pointing out that, funding, anti-imperialist jihadists might come back to bite us somewhere later along the line. to essentially be allying ourselves and giving material support to a group that was responsible for, the worst attack on American soil since Pearl Harbor is all around baffling and shows a great disregard for, the original rationale of the war on terror, at least as it was sold to the American public. Let's go back to the article again. This goes on to talk about how it's not even just in Syria, because, we've talked about these stories a little bit before, too, how we've been fast and loose with who we ally with in our push to overthrow Assad. But, it's not just localized there. Going back to the article, they say, just last month, an Associated Press investigation found that the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen, which enjoys the support of both the United States and the UK, has paid large sums to Al-Qaeda commanders in exchange for their leaving key locations throughout coalition-controlled Yemen, while also allowing the terror group's forces to retreat with all of their weapons, cash, and supplies without fear of reprisal. Senior government figures involved in the coalition's dubious deal-making later confirmed that the United States had been informed of the arrangements and even had avoided conducting airstrikes against Al-Qaeda militants in Yemen. However, the Pentagon vigorously denied complicity with AQAP militants when asked to comment. However, that denial seems disingenuous, given that the U.S. has been aware for years that its counterterrorism policies in the country, ostensibly carried out to reduce their effectiveness, were actually strengthening the terror group's presence. Furthermore, the U.S. has turned a blind eye to the coalition's open alliances with AQAP during major offenses, as well as the coalition's offering of weapons and cash to the group. Even when the Saudi-backed government of Yemen sent Al-Qaeda members to represent it in peace talks held in Geneva, the U.S. continued to give its full backing to the Saudi-led coalition, selling the coalition billions in weapons and supplying military and logistical assistance. As a result, the U.S. willingness to cooperate with Al-Qaeda in Yemen, once called the most dangerous regional node in global jihad by the CIA, has become stronger than at any time since it first emerged almost 20 years ago. So let's get this straight. We're currently in the war on terror. It's still ongoing, 17 years in. It is a war that technically, with parents' permission, somebody born after the 9/11 attacks could go and join the military and fight the war that inspired it. But, that should really be outrageous to anyone listening, because isn't that what our military is been tasked with since 9/11? Isn't that what they told us they've been doing, is fighting terrorism? But right here, it's spelled out that Al-Qaeda, that very same group that the United States held responsible for the 9/11 attacks, has become stronger than it has in almost 20 years due to our direct aid and support. And, we talk a lot about foreign policy issues on the program. And, we are also very critical of U.S. imperialism. And, there are also, of course, deeper issues we could really probe and talk about when we discuss, what our government and military industrial complex's agenda really is. But just on a surface level, this should outrage everyone on the political spectrum, whether you're liberal, conservative, alt-right, whether you're a socialist, a communist. It just dives right into the heart of the ongoing hypocrisy of American foreign policy. And, this is a deeply entrenched hypocrisy that has existed virtually from the very beginning. You go back even to World War II, where, America was essentially willing to work with fascists like Benito Mussolini and even Adolf Hitler until they started getting into the whole land-grabbing game. Or the history of American interventions throughout the Cold War, where we were giving material support to brutal right-wing dictators in exchange for outcomes that would be better for American U.S. economic and foreign policy. It is the original sin of America laid bare, that we are willing, or at least, the people who run our military apparatus are willing to have dangerous and even, America-hating bedfellows in order to advance their own agenda. So, just something to think about on this solemn anniversary of 9/11, which has inspired the longest ongoing war in American history that unfortunately seems to have no tangible end in sight. So with that, let's go to something that hits a little bit closer to home. So on the actual 9/11 attacks, of course, we all vividly remember all of the first responders who came on scene, the policemen, the firefighters, who spent months at the wreckage of Ground Zero, first trying to find survivors, and then trying to recover the bodies of their own fallen comrades in the rubble. Now, one would think, that this is such everybody, again, across the political spectrum, has supported all of the first responders and the work they did in Ground Zero. Unfortunately, many, if not most of them, are experiencing a lot of adverse health effects from working down at Ground Zero. And even the day of the attacks, of course, when we witnessed the collapse of the World Trade Center, it sent tons and tons of debris and toxic particulates into the air. Anybody working down there has been dealing with a lot of severe health issues, everything from severe asthma to particular forms of cancer. Now, we're going to play this clip, actually from Fox News, believe it or not. Of course, I think this is one of those particular issues where, they're talking about the firefighters, the policemen, and Ground Zero. They're going to cover this in a particularly fair way because, this is something anybody across the political spectrum can get particularly outraged about. But he has Jon Stewart on to talk about a precarious situation going on with a bill to provide free health care to all of the 9/11 first responders, because, as we said, they're dealing with a lot of adverse health problems because of it, and how that bill has recently been put in jeopardy. So we're going to go ahead and play this clip from that interview, and then when we come back, we're going to discuss it a little bit.
Them earlier this week. And the Droga Bill was introduced. That's the bill that back in 2010 made the funding possible. There was resistance to it, which a lot of us here in New York weren't even aware was happening.
Right.
And we couldn't imagine who from New York or who from America could be against funding for people who were victims of this attack. And it turned out there were a lot of them, and a lot of them were playing politics by doing add-ons to bills. In other words, you've got this bill to keep first responders going or to keep any victim from there going, and they would tack on other matters, abortion or whatever it was.
Import-export tax. In 2015 it was, they tried to take the money that could have come out of the transportation bill, and they were holding the Droga Bill hostage to an import-export bill on oil.
Thankfully it got through, yes. But do you foresee any of those problems this time? Because, for instance, if one of your representatives in Congress or in the Senate or whoever it is who has to do the voting here, the no's, we'll be writing those down and telling you about them eventually. I promise that. But who has expressed opposition, John? Who has said, I can't be for this, and why? Anyone?
Sure. I mean, leadership on the Republican Party has always been against this. And
why?
The money. In the beginning when we were walking the halls in 2004 and 5 and 6, they said it was a New York issue. Then we showed them it was a national issue. Then they said, well, how are you going to pay for it? And that's like the oldest trick in the book. If they want to find money, they find money. Science caught up to Richie and myself and others who walked the halls of Congress because we knew this was going to happen. We said this was happening. The absorption through the nose, mouth, and skin. We ate there. We slept there. We cried there. We went to the bathroom there. We got sick because we went to the rush and to protect our city and nation. And every September 11th, all of these elected officials who are still in office from when we've been fighting since 2004, they come out and they say, we'll never forget 9/11. We'll always remember our heroes. That's BS.
You know, Richie and John and I and everyone else from down there, we'll never forget roaming the halls with our good friend Ray Pfeiffer, who had stage 4 cancer and spent his last weeks fighting for his brothers and sisters to get this passed, because that's the type of person that he was, and that's the type of courage. But man, I hope we never have to waste someone else's precious time that they could have with their families on that type of thing. It should no longer be that these guys have the burden of proof to their own government about what has happened to them. They were told down there the air was safe. Clearly it wasn't. And so, you know, in honor of him, these guys will never stop fighting, and in honor of everybody else. But can't we make this time finally give them some peace?
This story said.
So, yes, excuse me. So that, again, has been the state of the bill. And just to give a little update from where it was at, that bill eventually did go through without a bunch of pork, chiefly because people saw this report and inundated their representatives and basically shamed them into voting the right way. Unfortunately, another aspect of it that they didn't discuss here is that it was passed with a sunset clause. So in another 10 years, it's going to have to get reapproved. Now, a couple of angles with this. It just goes back to how despicable, you know, our Congress is, that like, oh, they can always find the money for war. They can't find the money to give free health care to the people who responded on 9/11 in New York. Of course, maybe we wouldn't have to be discussing this issue at all if we had a form of universal health care or Medicare for all in this country. But it just goes to show that, you know, our elected officials are unfortunately not above holding these kind of pieces of legislation hostage in order to push their own political agenda. You know, whether it's, and, you know, they cited a few times the Republicans did it, and, you know, Shepard Smith, you know, he's a Fox News commentator, so he was trying to highlight some times when, you know, Democrats did it. But bottom line, anytime any politician who's trying to use this as leverage or is trying to basically hold it hostage in order to push something they want through, that's just utterly despicable. And it really just speaks to how gross American politics and the legislature in general really have become. So we're going to take a quick break. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
Be apparent, but hunger is a rather prominent issue amongst the student body of Western. The Invisible Need Project is a multifaceted initiative that's aimed to help struggling students. Every 2 weeks, generous people donate their food to the pantry located in their Fawn Student Service buildings or other drop-off locations. All you need to do is grab a reusable bag and grab whatever food you need to help sustain yourself. If anyone's unsure when their next meal will be, or if you have a little extra food you'd be willing to donate, the food pantry is your place. If you're looking to help donate, become a volunteer, or just learn more, call 269-387-4742 or email dosa-inp@wmich.edu for details.
This is George W. Bush, and you're listening to 89.1 WIDR, Kalamazoo, Michigan, Kalamazoo. You know what you're listening to, Kalamazoo, Michigan, man. What are you, stupid?
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are back. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. Joined by my co-host, This is like a
Ermagerd Kurhurst.
I'm just gonna use like Warner Brothers voices to the show.
So that's next. We're gonna talk about some foreign policy news.
All right. But so I was thinking about I was just talking about some 9/11 stuff and foreign policy, and something I really wanted to cover while we're on like these kind of international news bits. Everyone's favorite crazy warmongering walrus man, John Bolton, said a bunch of crazy stuff. And I guess it's only crazy in the sense that, I guess I'll talk a little bit about what it actually said first, but he basically threatened the International Criminal Court for their presuming or even thinking about really investigating some U.S. war crimes that happened in Afghanistan. And I want to go specifically what he said. just so we got that context. So he was talking to the Federalist Society. This was on Monday. And the Federalist Society is like a super right-wing political action group. And he said, I want to deliver a clear and unambiguous message on behalf of the President of the United States. The United States will use any means necessary, and God, that sounds so gross coming out of his mouth, to protect our citizens and those of our allies from unjust prosecution by this illegitimate court. We will not cooperate with the ICC. We will provide no assistance to the ICC, and we certainly will not join the ICC. And he goes even further to say, we will respond against the International Criminal Court and its personnel to the extent permitted by U.S. law. We will ban its judges and prosecutors from entering the United States. We will sanction their funds in the U.S. financial system, and we will prosecute them in the U.S. criminal system. We will do the same for any company or state that assists an ICC investigation of Americans. Oof. Okay, so yeah, let's start with a little bit of context. So, is this necessarily new? I think it's one of those things, and it's almost become a cliche on the show and other left-wing outlets about how this administration really kind of takes the mask off of American foreign policy. Because, think about it, the International Criminal Court has been in existence. It was essentially kind of in response to the horrific human rights abuses that happened in World War II. And it's gone. ICC has dealt with its own criticism over the decades of who it really targets and who it prosecutes. Namely, a lot of its criminal prosecutions have been aimed at Africa and Latin America and other countries that, may not necessarily be innocent. It is strange that the ICC focuses so much on countries that are, economically underdeveloped and not run by white people.
I've heard the ICC critics refer to it as the International Caucasian Court.
There you go. And a lot of that is self-interest. Like let's be frank. The UN, a lot of it is predominantly run by like the NATO and Western European countries. However, in cases where, the ICC or even, America has been, challenged to run its own investigations, America uses a lot of its soft power to really keep, the ICC from doing so. Let's not forget about, what happened in the United States under the Bush administration. Nobody was held accountable for the torture that happened under the CIA and the U.S. military. Nobody was held accountable for all of the collateral damage. And the Obama administration's lying about that. Did they conduct an investigation? Did they give permission of the ICC to follow up on these allegations? No. They basically waved it off and said, we're going to look forward, not backward.
Crimes happen in the past.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe you're going to rob a store next week or something, but then it'll be in the past when it'll be prosecuted and, taken care of. It's not how you do things. Of course it was.
Oh, yeah. And it's you have to, particularly when we're talking about America, accountability needs to happen on a continuum. A lot of these administrations act like they're, they are their own, they are their own epochs. When really you trace it back, particularly the foreign policy under George W. Bush has really just been the status quo since then. And the Obama administration tried to distance themselves from what the Bush administration did. But even if you are to have this line that let's not get all caught up in what happened during the Bush years. Well, when you continue to make the mistakes and commit the war crimes of the Bush years, then that becomes a different thing, because you're the military-industrial complex under Bush and Obama. We're making we're committing similar and analogous human rights abuses, just as they are under Trump too. And I think this is particularly important because you will still have like some supporters of Trump's administration out there, and their answer to things like Yemen or things like Libya will be like, well, that happened under the Obama administration. They were the ones who were responsible for that. Well, I don't see anybody in the Obama administration getting prosecuted, even though, what the president's main tagline was like, lock her up, right? The idea that we're going to like prosecute and drain the swamp, none of that happened, and he's also exacerbating all of these conflicts. And, Donald Trump and his administration have been ratcheting up a lot of their own war crimes under their belt.
I think in the Trump administration, drone strikes are up by about like 400% since Obama, roughly.
Yes, yeah. The Air Wars is a really good resource to look at some of these numbers, and yeah, they've shot up since Trump got into office. Like that rhetoric about targeting civilians and like their families and stuff, that translates into basically letting our military know that, hey, we're going to be a lot more blasé about civilian strikes, and even use it as like in this kind of punitive fashion. America tries to distance itself from the kind of siege warfare that Saudi Arabia is doing against Yemen right now, but we are as much the facilitators of it because of the way we fund it. And what's really striking to me about John Bolton coming out and saying this now is, not only do I think it's an aspect of taking the mask off, but this administration is forcing not only a lot of people in America but the international community too to come to terms with America as a dangerous and volatile actor on the world stage. And it's almost like it seems to me like John Bolton is trying to do this preemptive thing where it's like, don't you even think about it. Don't you even think about starting to call us out on our war crimes, or we're going to do X, Y, and Z.
I would argue that what John Bolton's doing, trying to go after the ICC now, is not just because of that court going looking into the torture, but it's also been Palestinian rights groups have been pushing really hard to get like their case brought to the ICC of the abuses of the nation state of Israel. And I think that's another big reason as to why Bolton is going after the ICC now. You can see it that like the PLO's main office in the U.S., Washington, D.C. got shut down around the same time. It's probably not a coincidence.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, it's all wrapped up into it. Part of his speech, too, talked about, and the same goes if you try to investigate, Israel, because, that's another... Israel, even more than the United States, I think, has really been getting a lot more international pressure than usual about the human rights abuses they've been committing against the Palestinians. Actually, has kind of panned out interesting way in Michigan and New York politics, and we'll talk about that maybe a little bit later on in the show. And there are also questions of like these threats. Like, I mean, how is this particularly legal to threaten these judges and like these investigators from conducting investigations against the United States? I mean, it seems to be like that is a violation of international law. And, the deep irony is America is one of the countries that helped set up the International Criminal Court in the first place. So, for him to like come out and talk about how the ICC is useless and it needs to die, the ICC was created by America in the first place as a response to World War II. And to see them come around now and try to say that, this thing that we helped create, well, you can't use that against us. And he doesn't offer any actual logic or rationale behind it. It's just these overt threats, like even bullying, I would say.
Yeah, that's not gonna... Well, first of all, like our country and its foreign policy do not care about international law. Like the Iraq War was illegal. All these other so-called war on terror interventions were also illegal, most of them. Like, so this is nothing really new either. As for threatening them directly, like it's kind of strategically tone deaf too, if you ask me. Because what if these investigations actually go through? I don't think these judges are going to like really, even want to take their side after being threatened like this,
No, yeah, it precisely. And like we we were talking like a little bit earlier in the show about how America has a history of like this kind of disastrous and cyclical world policy, and that again, a lot of them are a violation of human rights, going in and interfering with another country, overthrowing democratically elected leaders. Again, it seems like the International Criminal Court has stayed out of our affairs, basically by the tacit threat that America is the world's first superpower. But I think with what John Bolton said, I've never seen the United States necessarily like just make that, instead of subtext, that's the text. You just put it right out there. It's like, we're bigger, we're stronger, and we will come after you if you come after us.
Yeah, that's the whole neocon philosophy. That on top of something Donald Trump also said, like, we should take the oil. We should just go in there and take the oil. It really does, take the mask off in more ways than one. Like, it's rather more obvious than I might have expected. But I mean, now people are at least aware of what's going on for the most part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, hopefully, I wish this was something that got a little bit more media coverage, because this is outrageous. This is right up there with like Trump talking about fire and fury against North Korea, but it doesn't get as much attention because there's a lot of people in the establishment American press who don't necessarily want to highlight the war crimes of the United States. Occasionally there'll be something so overt that you can't really ignore it, like that bus bombing in Yemen that even MSNBC and CNN went on to cover. But
yeah, that's caused a lot of government bodies in bed with Saudi Arabia on this to like really sort of start backing off of this whole Yemen war thing. Like, it's not a good look for everybody involved with it. Like, I've heard at one outlet say that even the Pentagon was thinking about like pulling back a little, which is crazy to think about.
Wow.
Yeah. of all places. I'm sure the UK is feeling the heat. I don't think. I really hope that Canada is not trying to work with the Saudis anymore, especially after their government threatened them on Twitter.
Oh yeah, that's right. Those pesky Canadians.
Sorry about the bus thing.
So you know what? I was wondering, maybe let's take a little detour and talk a little bit about BDS.
Yeah.
Because we kind of danced around the topic of Israel, and this is something that's interesting, been coming up in both New York and Michigan politics fairly recently, and we're referring to both Gretchen Whitmer and Cynthia Nixon have basically had to come out and discuss where they stand on BDS recently, and it's actually been like used as a cudgel against them, which is probably the most interesting and kind of under-discussed aspect of this story to me.
Let's start with New York. So like the New York State Democratic Party, that's right, the Democratic Party of the state, funded and sent out a mailer that accused Cynthia Nixon of being an anti-Semite for, among other reasons, at one point allegedly supporting BDS. Now, if you look back into her record as like an actress in making certain public statements, she did sign a form saying that she did not approve of the Israeli government's treatment of Palestinians, but like it very specifically did not advocate for BDS. Now, this has been like a huge controversy for Cuomo, because obviously someone in Cuomo's corner had to have pushed this within the New York Democratic Party, and the party did claim they're gonna send out something for Cynthia as of a couple days ago, but the primary is literally tomorrow. So if you know any New Yorkers, any people from New York State, tell them to vote tomorrow.
Oh yeah.
And Cynthia Nixon, I think now is claiming that she does not support BDS or something like that. I haven't read her specific statement, but it's just a baseless, gross accusation. And even the New York Times said it was like, a horrible practice by Cuomo, but still endorsed him anyways.
Oh, yeah. And, bringing it back home here in Michigan, there was also similar things kind of on the part of the Bill Schuette campaign, throwing barbs at Gretchen Whitmer, accusing her of supporting BDS. And, here's what she had to say about it. She said, Schuette's partisan attack dogs would rather lie about my unwavering support for Israel than explain to voters why he supports congressional Republicans' plan to let insurance companies... Okay, so going back to issues. And then she said, the truth is that in the state Senate, I proudly sponsored resolutions to reaffirm the unbreakable partnership between Michigan and Israel. I believe that the BDS movement is an affront to that relationship, and I am 100% opposed to BDS. And then she says, I strongly support the bipartisan anti-boycott legislation that was signed into law by Rick Snyder last year, and will do everything in my power to uphold it as Michigan's next governor.
See, I kind of learned something new that I didn't even know was in the state from this article. Like, this legislation that we're talking about specifically bans like companies, nonprofits, groups from boycotting any specific country. Now, it doesn't name Israel specifically, but I think you can take a guess at which countries people are trying to boycott lately that it might be. Now, what's interesting I find here is her running mate, now Garland Gilchrist, did not specifically recant the tweets he made around 2009 that were critical of the Israeli government, but now said that he supports the Jewish community and BDS is detrimental to the peace process. And he also claimed it as like, the Republicans inventing an issue to go after them with, which it kind of is, because like there's only so much like a state government can do about the whole Israel-Palestine conflict. But at the same time, I guess it shows, an interesting dichotomy of where both Gretchen and her running mate stood in the past and how they're acting now.
Yeah, and I'd even say this for like Cynthia Nixon too, because like something that interestingly to me, obviously not touched in the establishment press and even not so much in some more progressive outlets like Democracy Now! Is what about the argument, like, I personally support the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement. The Democratic Socialists of America has gone out and said that they support it. There are a lot of people on the American left who are supportive of the BDS movement.
Yeah.
And it kind of behaves as though that part of the electorate doesn't exist, or that there's not that argument to be made that like, oh no, don't accuse me of supporting BDS, when there's a political argument to be made that like, yeah, I support BDS. And frankly, like, if Israel did not want a boycott, divestment, sanctions movement targeted against them, well, maybe they should stop acting like an apartheid state. There's an idea. But yeah, it probably surprises me a little bit more coming from Nixon than from Gretchen Whitmer. Gretchen is of course more of a centrist and establishmentarian, but Cynthia Nixon has gone out of her way to court the DSA and has pushed herself as the progressive leftist challenger to Cuomo. So it disappoints me that she didn't have like a more nuanced response to this. That the issue is being painted as an anti-Semite if you support the BDS movement. Supporting the BDS movement does not mean that you are against the Jewish people, or even necessarily against Israel, but it does mean that you are against the Israel's policy when it comes to Palestine. You are against the human rights abuses that they've been perpetuating against them. Why is that hard to say? Why is that hard to say for a progressive challenger like Cynthia Nixon, or even somebody who I think we can talk a little bit more about why Gretchen wouldn't do it, but still, I found that part of it pretty disappointing.
If you follow that same line of logic, though, supporting BDS would make you an anti-Semite, then you could argue that every politician that pushed for the war on terror is either anti-Arab or anti-Islam. With more credibility, I might add, because we're not trying to bomb Israel.
No, yep, and well, I think that's a whole discussion too about how Islamophobia is used politically, either by Republicans who trumpet it or Democrats who basically tolerate it. Let's not forget during the Obama years, his explanation for jihadist terrorism was just literally there's just some bad apples in the bunch and not a complex array of geopolitical and economic factors, some of which were caused by us.
No kidding.
Yeah. But yeah, so I would recommend anybody out there research the boycott, divestment, sanctions movement and what it actually is, because that has been left out of the conversation. And it disappoints me to see that the establishment is using, whether it's the establishment Republicans of Schuette or the establishment Democrats of Andrew Cuomo, that they're successfully using this as a cudgel against progressive challengers, when really we need to have a broader discussion about what Israel is doing. And, granted, there are progressives and leftists out there who are brave enough to challenge that narrative, to say supporting the BDS movement does not make you an anti-Semite, but I think this could have been an opportunity for a teaching moment, and the Democrats, whether you're a progressive challenger or you're a centrist, you really dropped the ball on it. You did.
I would say with in Cynthia Nixon's case, with 2 or 3 days away from the primary, there's not really a lot of time to articulate your statement. You'd have to come out a little bit faster and stronger against anti-Semitism specifically, and make these other points. In Gretchen's case, there's not really as much of an excuse. I mean, she did help pass that bill, so we probably know that there's a very good chance she's taking money from AIPAC or some connected, lobbying group. I will say, however, that some people talk as if this is sort of a deal breaker to voting for her in the general. I would disagree. There's a couple reasons why I'm still gonna vote Gretchen that I'm just gonna go over real quick. It's not as much about her specifically. It's about the other people that she would be working with on the statewide ticket. I remember Garland Gilchrist ran to be Detroit's city clerk, and he was he was running really hard on replacing these really hackable voting machines, making sure that voter suppression doesn't happen as bad as it did in Detroit last time. And we have Dana Nessel, who's also statewide, not exactly the same part of the ticket, but I imagine her job would be a lot harder if she became Attorney General with Schuette as governor.
Oh yeah.
So I think that I think progressives that are planning on not voting for Gretchen, I think should probably, in my opinion, should consider the other people that are running with her and how that's going to affect the state a lot collaboratively, if that makes sense.
No, I mean it does, because let's be clear. Hypothetical future, Dana and Gretchen both win. They're probably not going to see eye to eye the whole time, and I could definitely see a situation where Gretchen Whitmer would give her some stumbling blocks to pursuing, a lawsuit that she wanted to pursue, such as, for example, maybe if Blue Cross and Blue Shield were involved, but. If she won and Bill Schuette was governor, it would just be a horrendous deadlock. I think Dana would be in an impossible situation where she wouldn't be able to really fulfill the mandate on which people voted for her, and she'd probably be spending most of the time just having to face off with her own governor, which if Gretchen was in, it's not gonna be all the time, maybe 40, 30%
I would
of the time,
argue it would be a pretty small percent of the time, because people would have eyes on her. She wouldn't be able to get away with stuff like that, Gretchen, I don't think.
Yeah.
And I imagine it'd be more likely anyway for Dana to try to sue Spectrum Health, because they've consistently tried to get away with not providing trans coverage, and they're a competitor with Blue Cross, so this could work out.
All right, well, I think with that, let's go ahead and move to break. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
You're listening to Wider Kalamazoo.
Great Scott!
89.1 FM, Radio Evolution.
Support for 89.1 WIDR FM is provided by Modest Mouse, performing at Wings Event Center in Kalamazoo on Tuesday, September 25th at 7:30 p.m. For more information about Modest Mouse in concert at Wings Event Center in Kalamazoo on September 25th, call 269-345-1125 or visit wingseventcenter.com or modestmouse.com.
Stay tuned for Wider's weekly RSO Spotlight on WIDR Kalamazoo.
Sports Club Council is an RSO on Western's campus that is formed by individuals motivated by common interests and desire to participate in their favorite sport activity. Sport clubs vary in focus and programming since student members manage the operation of the clubs and decide club activities. A sports club may be competitive, recreational, or social, or any combination of all of these. The SEC meets once a month on Tuesday nights in the Student Recreation Center in room 312 at 9 p.m. For more information about the Sports Club Council, contact me at garrett.p.stewart@wmich.edu. Thank you.
This has been our weekly RSO Spotlight on WIDR Kalamazoo. For more information on how to spotlight your RSO, head to widrfm.org.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. So, coming back, we're going to talk about good news, bad news coming out of the Michigan State Legislature. And I don't know, Nora, should we start with the good news or the bad news first?
Let's start with the good news.
Yeah, all right. So, one thing that has actually been kind of an issue or a subject for a while was whether or not you are legally required to report whether or not you have a felony on your job application. And recently, September 7th, it went through the state legislature, and Tricky Rick himself signed off on it. And what it will do is basically...
wasn't it an executive order?
Yeah, it was an executive order.
Yeah, that would be just from Rick himself.
Oh, I said the
people.
Legislature. Yeah. So he signed an executive order on Friday, and it removes the check box before job applications on NeoGov. That's a website particularly the state government uses. The box will be replaced with an affirmation of good character statement, according to the release. According to this, Snyder is hoping private employers will start the process of removing the checkbox from job applications or moving it to later in the process. Snyder says he wants Michigan to be a role model when it comes to felony checkboxes. He went on to say, the continuation of Michigan's comeback depends on all populations and communities being part of our success. We have to keep working to reduce barriers to employment and by modernizing our system to move outside the box. We can offer second chances to many residents who are ready to work and already trained for the exact jobs that employers are desperate to fill. The AP reports that a state job applicant's criminal past may be taken into consideration later in the process, and some people may not be able to fill certain jobs if their crime is somehow related to the position. But this is actually some pretty good news, and I do want to highlight here, though. Let's not make any mistake. This isn't just Governor Snyder deciding from the goodness of his heart to, help formerly incarcerated folks.
If he did, he would have done that a long time ago. Mm-hmm. Also, considering that it's an executive order, it could be just as easily reversed.
That is true.
Shooty comes in, which he probably will because he's in bed with fascists. And
well, actually, Gretchen. Last poll I saw had Gretchen. I had
like 9 or something like that.
It was over 10 points actually.
Oh wow! Yeah. Last one I saw was 9. Mm. I mean, Shooty could still try and steal it with cross-check and God knows what.
Oh, yeah. No,
that's probably what I'm worried about most going into this general election, like all these voter suppression tactics nationwide, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
But, of course, both nationwide and red states, just to suppress as much of, the popular will as possible. Yeah, we'll see what happens.
Never forget, 70,000 people were knocked off the voter rolls here in Michigan in predominantly Democratic areas. So
Trump only won by 10K.
Yeah.
It's definitely stolen.
Yeah, it was.
Inside job.
Yep, exactly. But not to get off the beaten path here, but so when I talk about he didn't do it from the goodness of his heart, we should also keep in mind that there have been a lot of progressive groups here in Michigan who have been pushing this for many, many years. Michigan United, particularly here in Kalamazoo, was doing a lot of work around it for a long time. They were able to get this kind of legislation passed here locally. And they also did this a lot on the east side, and other local cities in Michigan have already kind of laid the groundwork for this kind of policy. So, this was years of grassroots efforts that, Governor Snyder, to his credit, finally acted upon. But let us not act as though this did not happen without years of grassroots work and public pressure campaigns.
Oh yeah, that's exactly how it is. A lot of times when these things do get passed that actually help people, you can't really give credit to the politicians themselves most of the time because they were previously either weren't interested or weren't gonna do it. until they really got forced on it. Like, I think the civil rights movement's a great example. Women's suffrage, all these other things. That's how stuff gets done in this country.
Yep, absolutely right. So, this is a good, positive thing, and actually, we got another positive story. But why don't we hit on one of the negative ones real quick?
Semi-negative,
but this is the story. And where is it? Actually, I was actually, if you could start on it, Nora, and then I'll try to.
I don't know how many of you heard about or signed the ballot initiative to guarantee paid sick leave to Michiganders, but it got if it gets a certain amount of signatures, like maybe not enough to get on the ballot, it can, or if it's already on the ballot, the legislature can vote to adopt and amend, meaning they can just make it law right there, but they're going to change a few things first. Now, critics will say that because of the nature of our state government, they'll probably just gut most of the good things out of the bill and then pass it as, with very little of the teeth it had, their effect prior. It's still, to see what actually happens. I mean, these sort of legislative processes are usually pretty slow. So just keep a watch on what actually happens. Who's this? This is a lame duck legislature and, governor, so they can kind of do whatever they want with it, assuming that it doesn't get delayed somehow until the new legislature comes in, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and I would also agree we have to be fairly weary about this. And particularly, this is a pattern I'm seeing a lot from, the GOP in the Michigan State Legislature, is that they'll try to get ahead of a popular ballot initiative or amendment and then tweak it to the advantage of their donors and their interests. Let's not forget, marijuana almost wasn't on the ballot this year, and it wasn't because it was trying to get they were trying to fight back against it or shoot it down. Actually, the Republican legislature wanted to get ahead of it and actually legalize marijuana early so that it wouldn't appear on the ballot. And as we've talked about on the show before, a lot of what's going on with legalization here in Michigan is trying to make it poised to basically be a handout for multinationals rather than the small startups that would really benefit from the legalization of marijuana. So it echoes a lot of their typical playbook to me, and I want to keep a really close eye on seeing what the predominantly Republican legislature in Lansing tries to do to this bill. Already, they've seen them. They say on paper that they support the $12 minimum wage, but business. I'll even go back to the article. Business groups have raised concerns about how their costs would be excessively raised by the minimum wage and paid sick leave proposals. The Senate Majority Leader said there's no prohibition on us enacting and amending the proposals this year. Just to give some historical context, back in 2013, when a similar minimum wage idea was on the table, GOP leaders negotiated with Democratic leaders to boost Michigan's then $7.40 minimum wage to $9.25. However, the original initiative was at $10.10 an hour. And, excuse me. And, some of the opposition has said that it's basically an attack to, really circumvent democracy. Curtis Hurdle from East Lansing called it a bait-and-switch tactic, a trick on the voters of Michigan, an attack on democracy. And Democratic State Representative Leslie Love of Detroit argued that such a move to keep initiatives off the ballot amounted to voter suppression. And, again, this is also similar to what they were trying with marijuana, because one of the big reasons they wanted both this proposal, this ballot proposal, and the marijuana one to not appear on the ballot is because that would have drove voter turnout for largely left-leaning non-voters to get to the ballot box. So, it was part of their own self-interest to get ahead of this and try to legalize it or deal with this particular ballot initiative for a minimum wage and paid sick leave in the legislature rather than waiting for voters to decide in November.
You bring up an interesting point tying this to voter suppression specifically, because there is a ballot initiative to expand voting rights that, thank God, did make it on the ballot this year. It almost didn't, but when the group threatened to lawsuit the Board of Canvassers when they were dragging their feet, I guess it pushed them enough that it's going to be on the ballot too. So that's going to make it at least harder. I do have my criticisms about that initiative as well. However, it doesn't do anything to say specifically replacing the voting machines with non-hackable ones, though it makes it easier to recount. Nothing really. I don't know what it'll do to cross-check in the state, and it won't really do anything about getting the day off to vote or getting us out of the electoral college, anything like that. But, not to get into the weeds of it too quick, but we have a lot of ballot initiatives, and I think we already mentioned all of them on this show, and that's going to make us, that's going to make me specifically more optimistic on voter turnout this year.
Oh, yeah, and I think any state, particularly that has legalization on the ballot, is going to drive a lot of turnout. We've still got that gerrymandering move on the ballot. They fought hard against that one. They did not want that to show up on the ballot in November, but we ended up doing it, and I think that while gerrymandering is a little bit more of a nuanced and complex issue than legalization, I think that's also going to drive a lot of turnout, especially from independents who are maybe anti-corruption and don't really like the idea of gerrymandering in the first place.
Well, that's not without my criticisms either, because that does set up specifically a group for a citizen-led group that specifically has representatives for Democratic citizens, Republican citizens, and independent citizens, which still works, largely privileges the two-party system. For example, what's going to happen if those two parties become obsolete, or if at least one of them disappears within the next 10 to 20 years? Is that still how it's going to be set up? These old parties are going to have the representatives, or is it going to be altered a little?
That's actually a really good point. And yeah, if I could go in and rewrite it myself, I'd almost say maybe you should just have independents.
Yeah, seriously.
From the two political parties right up these district lines. Somebody who's not going to be motivated by self-interest when they're doing this type of stuff.
Also consider that the parties themselves, their establishments, could try to get their fingers into influencing these citizens themselves, including the ones that are that would mark themselves as independents,
Mm-hmm.
That could be a way to get around it. But, it's still going to be a huge net positive that it's going to be a lot harder for these districts to be horribly gerrymandered. For example, other parts of West Michigan, you have South Grand Rapids and Traverse City in the same congressional district, as well as you have North Grand Rapids and Battle Creek in another same congressional district. It's a mess.
Indeed. And I want to talk about this other story in the Michigan legislature. A bill that really caught my eye and could, if passed, it would curb a lot of those barbecue Beckys out there. But this is from the Grio.com, and it was published September 6th. Michigan lawmaker wants to make it a felony to call police on black people living their lives. So this is not really in response to a lot of what we've seen. This issue has been raised time and time again through not only Black Lives Matter over the years, but in particular these several high-profile kind of viral events where you had a woman call the police on some black folks who were cooking out at the park in Oakland, or a young woman who was taking a cat nap in her study hall, or I think there was what they called her Permit Patty, who literally called the cops on a child who I can't remember if they were running a lemonade or a water stand.
I think it was water.
It was water, yeah.
Permit Patty also was selling like dog marijuana without a permit.
Yeah, irony.
Oh, geez. Okay, so one thing I find interesting about this is that it should be illegal to just, call the cops on people for no reason. But at the same time, like, I would question a bit, like, making it a felony specifically. Thankfully, that might not affect their job prospects in this state, as we've, just updated. But at the same time, like, this sort of, like, trades in one form of criminalization for another in, like, a weird way. Although the criminal legal system does, largely very much disproportionately target black and brown people. So, I still have few problems with this legislation, but it's good. It should be super not allowed to just call the police on people for no reason. That also distracts from people who might be under threat by actual violent crime. Like, what if these first responders have calls to take,
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point, and it's to say, like, I think I'm a little wary of, because I could see potential situations where this could be abused. Say you have somebody making a legitimate call on someone, and let's say hypothetically this person has a lot of power in the community. It would be easy for them to put pressure on, say, like their local police agency to dismiss it as one of these felonious calls. Now, granted, like, that's really getting into the weeds of it, and I know the intent of this legislation, and what I really think is unique and brave about it is it spells out, like, the danger it really puts people in when you erroneously call 911 on them, especially black people, who, as we have seen, are far more likely to be victimized, brutalized, or murdered by law enforcement for these kind of mild, low-level offenses. And I wanted to read a little bit about from the article about, like, the rationale and such behind this. So it's being proposed by Representative LaTanya Garrett. She's out of Detroit. She said throughout the country there's been an influx of calls where black brothers just being black just seems to be a problem. Said being a black woman, having a black husband for 10 years and having 3 black children, I'm always worried about their safety. So I put myself in their shoes and asked, what safety measures are in place to protect black people who are just living everyday life and having law enforcement called upon them for no apparent reason? Excuse me. And it's interesting. So the police chief out of Detroit kind of made a statement to it. He said, if it's something that doesn't rise to the level of criminal matter, that becomes more of a civil issue. We're not going to be agents for discriminatory treatment. And she goes on to kind of her rationale. She says, waiting for your friends at a Starbucks is not a 911 call. It's a call of intimidation, the state senator said. That's going to be a hate crime, Hamilton said. This is a different person. This pattern of calling the police on black people going about their business and participating in the life of our country has to stop. And, one takeaway I get from this is, like, it's already a criminal offense to call 911, to misuse the 911 system. I can't remember off the top of my head if that is a misdemeanor or a felony, but I do know it's at the very least a very serious misdemeanor. So it almost seems to me like it's tweaking some enforcement that should already be on the books. And, particularly, it's kind of making it more specific when you have these situations where it seems like they're definitely or ostensibly being racially targeted. And, what I do kind of like about this is it cuts through, a lot of that kind of BS and really speaks towards institutional racism, because a lot of times they'll make these arguments of, like, I think they're doing this thing that maybe violates park rules, or they didn't have a permit, or it is loitering in a Starbucks for too long, things that you could point to and say, like, well, are on the books. But would you normally enforce these rules? Would you normally, if there were two white people waiting around at a Starbucks for their friend to show up, would they have the police called on them for loitering? Do you think that would really happen? So it's calling out how, oddly enough, through the legal system itself, how often these kind of legal ordinances and laws are disproportionately used against people of color, and stating specifically, this has to stop. We cannot weaponize law enforcement against our communities, it kind of speaks to the way a lot of white people use the police, not necessarily for public safety, but I believe somebody referred to it as thinking of the police as like a customer service hotline to come and deal with things that you find inconvenient.
911, may I speak with your manager?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I think you raised some good points about, potential ways that this law could be abused or misused, but I think overall it is a good thing. It'll be interesting to see the discussion that's had on it in the legislature. As we said earlier, this is Michigan, at least as far as the Senate and the House goes, is predominantly Republican. Although there are a lot of those kind of libertarian-leaning Republicans who have done some genuine stuff as far as criminal justice goes. But yeah, like I said, it'll be really interesting to see how this actually pans out.
I'll be keeping my tabs on this. That's all I had to say.
All right. I think it would be a good time to go to a break.
Yeah.
This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo, your only source for political revolution.
Using a cell phone while driving leads to 1.6 million crashes a year. Help us reduce that number by keeping your eyes off your phone and on the road. This has been a friendly reminder from Wider.
You're listening to WIBR FM, and this is your boy, Chill Mitchell. Yeah, that's right, the Good Burger guy, the Orange Soda guy. I do. Ooh. New movie coming out, WIBR FM. Y'all got to check it out. It's Kill.
Let's not start with that. What did we do?
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are back. This is the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. So let's start this last bit of the program. I wanted to give an update about the Bronson Park Freedom Encampment going on downtown. For those of you who don't know, there has been an encampment from homeless protesters set up there. It's been going on for several weeks now. It's actually ballooned up and gotten very, very large recent week or two. And for those of you who are down for the cause, they are still in need of lots of different supplies. Water, ice is a daily need. They also need tents and sleeping bags, and particularly as the fall weather is coming in, jackets, hoodies, sweaters, all of those are important. So several days ago, they dropped a new revised list of demands. And by the way, if there is an ongoing list of needs for the camp, you can check out wishlister.com/Kalamazoo-encampment/support. And then the Bronson Park Freedom Encampment has its own page on Facebook now as well. So, as I was saying, they came up with a revised list of demands. And there was a special working session of the City Commission. They met on Monday evening. I was actually down there for it. And the demands as they were, so one of the big criticisms that the camp has been giving the city officials and City Commission in particular has been that they have not actually addressed their concrete demands. That was actually the source of a lot of controversy at their last meeting when the commission voted down actually listening to the previous list of demands. So what's been going on is now the city manager has been meeting weekly with organizers from the encampment to address these demands and issues around homelessness. And they came back at this working session, the city commission did, to discuss whether they would endorse the city manager working on these demands with the homeless population. And the demands are City Commission to have an open public discussion regarding the demands laid out by Occupy Kalamazoo and the Bronson Park Freedom Encampment. 2, an immediate and thorough investigation of the alleged abuses occurring at the Kalamazoo Gospel Mission. Number 3, immediate access to mental, emotional, and physical health supports for residents of the encampment. Number 4, a structurally sound vacant building or a few vacant homes in close proximity that Bronson Park Freedom Encampment members can coordinate volunteer contractor services for in order to get the property up to code in time to move in before snow falls. And number 5, City of Kalamazoo to utilize the expertise of members of the camp and national best practices to develop a long-term housing first policy and program that better addresses the issue of homelessness in the future. Now, at the actual city commission meeting, here's kind of how it went down. So, the first demand in both the city commission and the protesters have agreed that part is being followed through on. The open dialogue is happening. Probably the stickiest point was the ask for an investigation into the gospel mission. There was a lot of hemming and hawing on the city commission about whether or not they should, as a commission, specifically target the gospel mission and encourage Kalamazoo Public Safety to investigate. A lot of those were basically, you heard primarily from the mayor and Commissioner Anderson, and a little bit from Jack Urban, although he actually was pretty pragmatic about the whole thing. They did not want to have the perception that the city commission was specifically targeting the Kalamazoo Gospel Mission and had this argument that like they don't want to be seen as that because that's a precedent. They don't want to be seen as going after specific nonprofit agencies. After a lot of debate and discussion,
they kind of already did do that with Chris Ducks in a Row plural.
Yeah, you're right, and it's a good point to make. Like, it seems like they don't seem to mind that when it's against a nonprofit or an idea or a group that is wouldn't be politically difficult for them to do so. And there are a lot of people who support the gospel mission that are enmeshed in both the city leadership, city government, and a lot of the philanthropic class here in Kalamazoo.
The gospel mission's already also pretty commonly been used as an excuse for, we have the gospel mission. See, we have a place for homeless people to go. So if it turns out these investigation results find some shady stuff, which they will, trust me, and then it's going to look bad for the city leaders, and that's probably something they don't want. So from that angle, it sort of makes sense that they're trying to avoid that sort of investigation.
Oh, yeah. Exactly. That's an excellent point, Nora. Because that, like you said, it gives something for the city government to lean on to say, see, we have adequate beds and such. I think it was Nathan Dennison from 1st Congressional UCC actually brought up the point that since they're a religious organization, they shouldn't even be counted among the number of beds that you can actually get in Kalamazoo as a homeless person. The compromise they did settle on, and the city attorney brought this up, basically amend that second demand to basically have the city commission instruct Kalamazoo Public Safety to take criminal allegations from the homeless population seriously and follow up on them, because a lot of the complaints of the homeless population is that even when they have presented these criminal allegations about the gospel mission to law enforcement, there have been reports they feel like they say they have been dismissed or treated unfairly by officers. And I will say, I feel like it's double-edged. One, it kind of avoids the responsibility of specifically calling out the gospel mission, which I think would be necessary. But at the same time, having the city commission come out and demand that Kalamazoo Public Safety take the homeless population seriously, that is good. That is a good thing. What we've seen in the past here in Kalamazoo when these kind of resolutions are put out is law enforcement does at least act on them in the short term. When Hadley got that report back that showed that there was more institutional racism in his department than Ferguson, tangible steps were made. Under this new police chief, we have heard some things have been backtracked, but I know she was right there in the room when they passed this. So we'll have to see how that pans out, but that's at least been written on the record. Then the other demands, the immediate access, the finding a vacant building, and developing a long-term housing first policy, they gave basically through this resolution the city manager the go-ahead to pursue all of these with the homeless encampment working group and essentially come back to the commission if they ended up at a roadblock or they have a hard time figuring something out. Something that came up, issues with a few of these demands. Number 3 sounds pretty tangible. It involves, they made it very clear that the city does not provide these services directly, but through their own networks, they can help facilitate with the homeless population, their ability to find these resources, these emotional and physical supports. One of the issues they raised with finding a vacant property or a building is they mentioned, I believe the city manager said right off his head he couldn't think of any vacant properties owned by the city that would be suitable. And that does go into a palpable issue and something that would even be a roadblock with the long-term housing first policy is a lot of these empty properties are privately owned. Many of them owned by, the Kalamazoo Land Bank, which has a history of discriminatory practices and also a history of basically helping to gentrify the city at large.
Yeah, that's basically what's been happening. I actually have a story from just this morning about how the homelessness issue hit pretty literally close to home. So this morning I was about to get into my car to drive to work, and I found that somebody was sleeping in my car, and she was, of course, a homeless person, and she said she was just in there looking for food and shelter. And I was a little bit annoyed, but I'm like, okay, I get it. I know people in the encampment. It's a real problem. It's valid to want to look for food and shelter, and it must have been cold last night. So, I pretty much just gave her some extra food I had in the house and a water bottle, sent her on her way. Like, she didn't really give me any trouble. I was able to drive to work just fine. The contents of my glove were all on the passenger seat, but she didn't really take anything. Like, not CDs, not my phone charger. Like, nothing really of value was taken. She didn't even eat much of the even eat much of the Sour Patch Kids in my car, as far as I could tell.
Oh, well, you don't want to get that sugar rush when you're trying to sleep.
I guess not. But, like, it's what these people want. They want food, they want shelter, they want things that'll keep them alive. And, like, you know, there's been, like, some of the people pushing back against the homeless encampment have kind of attacked the character of the homeless in general, but, like, they're good people. Like, if they sleep in your car, they won't even take stuff, evidently. So this is,
Yeah,
I'm kind of impressed by it. I'm pleasantly surprised a little bit that, you know, nothing bad happened out of it and that I got to work on time still.
Yeah, and I would advise, like, anybody who's critical of the camp down there or knows people who are, try to convince them, go down to the camp and talk to them. And
oh, yeah.
Spend some time down there. You know, like I said, there is a very, like, you know, family type oriented community down there. It reminds me a lot of, like, Standing Rock or some of the other kind of protest encampments I've been to, where everybody down there is extremely supportive of each other, and, you know, it's very warm and welcoming, and they'll talk to just about anybody who comes up. There's one other issue associated with this that, you know, I don't think has really been hit on by a lot of the other media covering this, and it's that, you know, the city so far, their top priority has seemed to be getting the homeless to move their encampment out of Bronson Park. You know, they tried to move them over to Cedar, which was kind of an inadequate space because, you know, it was a lot more concrete. You're right next to a building full of asbestos. There's not as much shade, and they were getting harassed more by, you know, people leaving the bar at night. There was actually an instance where somebody threw firecrackers at the Cedar camp. But, you know, I think what the city needs to understand about the encampment is, like, in trying to move the camp, before, like, really working through some of these demands, you're putting the cart before the horse. And you don't necessarily understand how protest camp works. The reason that they are down in Bronson Park is because of these demands, because of these problems with how the city has not been doing enough to help the homeless community. The very fact that they are at Bronson Park, that they are in a highly visible area, that's why they are there. You know, to move them somewhere out of the way that is not as visible, that may be what the city wants, but that goes against, you know, tactically what a protest camp is there to do. And I know it does get a little, not necessarily messy, but maybe nuanced with the fact that you have a population there that is protesting who are actively homeless. But yeah, like, the fact of the matter is, the reason they are down there, and they are ostensibly committing civil disobedience with the civil ordinances that are currently on the books, the reason they are down there is to give visibility to the issue of homelessness in Kalamazoo. And, you know, you're not going to get them, or at least, like, trying to get them to move their encampment somewhere less visible without making progress on these demands first. That is back asswards. And, you know, my advice to the city is, if you want to see the encampment moved or you'd like to see them go somewhere else,
give them houses.
Give them houses. Yeah, get through on these demands, man. And, you know, it's probably the most difficult short-term demand. You know, find that vacant property, that vacant building. Okay, a lot of them are privately owned, but I thought we were supposed to be the city full of all these great philanthropists, you know?
Yeah.
And not only that, but, you know, I think, like, a lot of time we'll criticize the billionaire class of Kalamazoo because it seems transparent to us that they're trying to gentrify, they're trying to get, like, put pressure on working class people and move them away from downtown. If they want to prove me wrong, provide these people with a space. Provide
double dare you.
Yeah,
Triple
exactly.
dog dare you, billionaire Kalamazoo people who probably aren't listening to this.
And, you know, if that won't happen, even, like, you know, I would even suggest something similar to a GoFundMe or something. Buy up one of those properties. I think the community can band together and do that. And you know, that would actually be maybe even a little bit better, a little bit more democratic, because it wouldn't simply rely on like a couple of billionaires. Like get everyone in the city involved. Like you can give a couple bucks, give a couple bucks, you can give a couple thousand, give a couple thousand. Let's buy these people a space that is theirs for the winter time, and that they can start working on. You know, and there's similar models to this. It reminds me a little bit of a few years ago when I was traveling around in Europe. There was an anarchist collective called Freeland Christiania, and that's essentially how it started. It started as a squat, and you know they reclaimed it and they built it up from scratch, and they have a thriving community over there. I don't see why you couldn't do the same kind of thing here at Kalamazoo. I don't know. I think that's about it. Anything else you wanted to add about the Freedom Encampment or anything else going down there, Nora?
Not that I know of.
Okay, well, we got about 10 minutes left. Are there any other stories that we wanted to cover while we still got time on air?
Yes, this is something that I've been trying to talk about a little bit earlier, but it's still pretty early in the school year, so it's a relevant thing. So, I don't know how many of you went to Bronco Fest, Bronco Bash, whatever it's called this year, but it seemed like there were a bit more campus, different types of campus conservative groups than usual. And one thing that those groups, I imagine, would often bring up is like the issue of free speech on campus. Now, it's recently been studied that this, before you start freaking out about it, this isn't as big or as widespread as an issue as some might like to believe. According to the Department of Education, there are, this is from a Vox article, there are 4,583 colleges and universities in the U.S., including 2- and 4-year institutions. And the Free Speech Project researchers had cataloged 90 instances since 2016 that fit the criteria of free speech being violated. Of those 90, only 2/3 took place on college campuses, meaning this is 60 incidents out of 4,500 colleges in the United States. It's roughly a little bit over 1%. Now, it's not just conservatives that are getting blocked. These are also speakers such as Princeton's Keeanga Yamada Taylor. She was the author of, I believe, the book From Black Lives Matter to Black Liberation. She got harassed on Twitter and eventually was, cut from like a speech at a college. Anna Kasparian from the Young Turks also was supposed to speak at a university, but was cut off at one point for saying mean things about pro-Trump women. So, but like next time someone tries to warn you about the whole so-called free speech crisis in college campuses, keep in mind that there's numbers as to why this is a little bit blown out of proportion. However, there's this story, but it's not a new story, but it's been circling around a lot lately. From 2014, Western Michigan University bans Boots Riley, who's now commonly known for the new film Sorry to Bother You, which is finally showing in Kalamazoo, I might add.
Yeah, so the downtown theater, right?
Yeah, it's at the AMC. I still don't like buying there. Remember the Alamo. Yeah. That's all I said. That's all I'm going to say about that.
They have the unique distinction of being the only theater in town to play Death of a Nation, which is this hyper right-wing propaganda film.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, it's I won't talk about it too much, but their whole thesis about Democrats were originally the party of slavery. That whole picadillo. It's that was 150 years ago.
Technically they're correct, but when civil rights got passed, the parties switched, and that's
exactly
basically what happened. You can look it up. Anyways, so when Riley tried to show up to Western in 2014, basically he got retaliated against for being part of the Occupy movement at the time, and he eventually they WMU agreed to have them so long as they foot the bill for 62 per hours for undercover police to be present to make sure nothing bad happens. So this is happened before in our own backyard. Just be watchful when this kind of stuff does go down. I don't have a lot much more to say about it, but just be mindful what actually happens. I have a couple more quick hits though.
Oh, please, by all means.
good news and bad news coming out of India. Funny I should use the words coming out of India because they just recently legalized gay sex, which was banned under colonial era law, not often enforced, but could be punished with up to 10 years in prison. This is huge, huge, huge for LGBT rights worldwide, because this is like, almost a couple billion people, and it won't even be that long until India's population outpaces that of China. So this is fantastic news for thousands and thousands of queer people. Unfortunately, India also is getting more in bed with the U.S. government. They're the biggest importer of weapons and will probably continue to do so. And they're cracking down more on dissidents, and it's not a good look for them.
It's unfortunate. And, one thing that I think gets left out of that story a bit is that pre-colonial India was a hell of a lot more gender fluid.
Oh,
than, Western civilization. If you're uninformed about that, it's disappointing, because I've heard some liberals like oh, they're finally getting with the 21st century. It's no, they were there until the UK colonized the hell out of them and told them that homosexuality and pansexual, all that stuff was bad.
Hey, what?
yeah. I mean, that's really all I wanted to add to that. But
this is definitely not India westernizing. This is India decolonizing in a way. This is, it's just great news for queer people. That's all I have to say. I actually have a pen pal who is involved with the LGBT rights movement in India. So I think what their priority is next, that movement, it might be marriage, or it might be getting the people who have been prosecuted for this to have their crimes either forgiven or being let out, or something else like that. But we'll see what happens. Trans people can already change their gender marker and stuff there. If anything comes up, you'll know. I'll be the first to talk about it.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, what else is going on? Oh, if you know any Chicagoans, Rahm Emanuel is not going to run for re-election for mayor.
Woo.
It's interesting, how many of these Midwestern mayors are willfully not running for re-election. We had it in Kalamazoo. We're having it in Chicago now.
Yeah, that's true.
Good news for Chicagoans. They do have a progressive option in the 2019 election. Troy LaRiviere. I'm probably pronouncing his last name wrong, but it's the only guy named Troy, and he worked on Bernie's campaign. He's not taking corporate money, and he worked within the public education system. He seems to be the guy to go with, as far as I can tell. But until then, just be watchful of what the Chicago government tries to pull during this lame duck session.
Wow. Well, it'll be interesting to see all these, all these Midwestern mayors who are down with austerity and corporate control, and maybe it's like a
policing.
Maybe it's like a Paul Ryan thing. It's all right, well, I've given the reins over the corporate class. Time for me to ride off into the sunset.
Spend all that money they made.
Mm-hmm.
I think with both the case of Emmanuel and Ryan, they could probably both see where the wind was heading. The people in their areas just do not like them anymore, and they were ready to just get rid of them. And rather than avoiding the humiliation of an election loss, they'd rather just leave in grace. I don't think that's necessarily what happened in Kalamazoo, but
no, I mean, Bobby Hopewell is still a fairly well-liked public figure.
Yeah. I guess another quick hit, telecoms are have been caught recently throttling YouTube and Netflix. Apparently, YouTube and Netflix are the ones that are hitting the most, because they're competitors to their media conglomeracy. But the head of CBS did get hit with Me Too, and so good riddance.
Good riddance, especially that guy. I'll never forget that horrible quote from him in 2016. Donald Trump might not be good for America, but he's good for CBS.
Bye.
Bye, Les. Here's some karma. Yep.
Let's have less of Les, but I wouldn't say he's getting karma, because the company's still probably going to give him a gold parachute unless it gets pushed back hard enough. And what are they going to do? Boycott CBS? They're one of the 5 media companies that own almost all the media.
Yeah, that's true. Well, still good riddance, and hopefully somebody with more of a conscience will get in there. Can't really hope for much, when it comes to network executives, but we'll see. All right. Well, trying to think, there's not much else I was really thinking about hitting on. I know I want to give a shout out to everybody who protested out in Paw Paw over the weekend. It was a really good turnout. I'll say I think it worked really well for them to actually be in the parade. I was kind of running around watching over, doing a little bit of security type stuff. And
did they stop the parade? Were they float in the parade, or how did it work?
They were actually part of the parade.
No way.
Part of the parade, yeah. And it was a very long, single file, quiet march. And one couple takeaways. Paw Paw folks weren't nearly as aggressive as they were last year. Actually, a few people started trying to pipe up and chant our skins. And people around them would actually be like, hey, quiet, be respectful. And so I think it worked well. Like, being silent, it seemed to have a really interesting impact. And I think there's more support for changing the name in Paw Paw than I think I originally realized. It seemed like they were more warmly received than I would have expected. There were a couple people who actually stopped the parade and did some civil disobedience. They held it down for a few minutes and ended up voluntarily moving to avoid arrest. I didn't actually witness that firsthand, but the people were a little bit more irritated about that. But I think it was a good way to really, make that statement before the end of the parade. And so once again, big shout out to everybody who organized around that, NASCO. Hopefully, we'll see some change in Paw Paw.
Oh, yeah.
I know there's people who live there who don't really like it. So
hopefully Hartford's next, because they do still use Native Americans as their high school mascot and on their water tower. Yeah. They don't use the R word, but they still not okay.
Still not okay. No.
If you're looking you're looking somewhere to help with the humanization of Native folks in Southwest Michigan, we got the statue down. Looks like we're making progress on Paw Paw. Hartford looks like it's next.
Yeah, knock on wood. So, all right, I guess with that, about time to wrap up the show. This has been the Hoodrat Strategist radio program, only on 89.1 WIDR Kalamazoo. You can find us on Facebook, and we also upload all of our episodes to YouTube after the fact. Keep your dial locked. There's more Wider coming up next, and keep on fighting for that revolution solution.